Got it.
All right, Andrew, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
For
thanks
those
for
of
having me.
you, yeah, man, for those of you that don't know Andrew at all, he's a guy that's been coming to our church for, what would you say, about maybe 4 months, something like that?
Yeah, three or four actually. I remember mentioning it to you like a few weeks ago, saying it was only like 2 months actually, but it's felt like so much longer.
Okay, gotcha. Gotcha. So yeah, we wanted to have you on because I know we've had quite a few good conversations recently. I know you have a channel specifically for especially helping young men with lust, pornography addiction, different things like that. So we wanted to have you on, discuss things like that, discuss a little bit of, your background, things that have helped you be able to help others, and just kind of get your perspective on things because it's something that I know is really important to you.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Awesome. So I wanted to ask kind of real quick, you can kind of go into your background. Like, did you always grow up a Christian? Like, have you always kind of been in church? When did you get saved? Just kind of a little bit of background, things like that to kind of start things off.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up a Roman Catholic. I went to the St. Joseph. I didn't really know that much about it. I was kind of involved in the church, went to CCD, which is like prep school, like Mondays after school, but I didn't really comprehend why I was going. I always believed in God, always believed that Jesus was the way, but I didn't understand what that way was until much later in life.
Okay.
I'd say right after high school, I graduated when COVID became rampant. So that was the class of 2020. I didn't even get to graduate actually. And
Gotcha.
so I kind of had to figure out what I was going to do with my life from there because I thought my life was going to go a certain way, going to graduate high school, then figure it out from there. But then when COVID came, it kind of shook everything up. I realized, hey, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Where do I even go from here? I didn't get that closure, if that makes sense. So I kind of went on the spiritual journey for a couple years. I got into self-help books, self-help podcasts, but something was still missing, something personal. And I would say it was about maybe a year or two ago that I found my way back to Jesus. And I guess I found my way through YouTube actually, like content creators like you guys, like Cliff Connectley, his shorts were popping up on YouTube, and I kind of just took a deep
Okay.
dive and kind of became obsessed with the Bible, learning more about it. And I even gave like other religions a shot. Like I was kind of biased since I already believed in God and Jesus specifically, but I took a look at Hinduism, things like that. And yeah, ultimately, I just figured that Jesus was speaking the truth, and I found him to be the most reliable.
Got it. And how long ago was that when you really, trusted Christ as Savior, like started to really understand some of these things?
I'd say about 2 years ago, but I didn't start joining a church until this year, actually. And it was actually your guys' church. I didn't explore too much with the different churches, but I work as a personal trainer for those who don't know, and their dad, who's the pastor of this church, he came in a lot. He was friends with my client Nick, and I found out he was a pastor. I said, "Oh, he seems pretty cool. Why don't I give his church a shot?" And I kind of put that off for a year
Cool.
until I decided one day, you know what, I'm just gonna show up. I didn't know anybody, and it was a really scary experience for sure, but it was worth it to get out of your comfort zone, especially when you think God's calling you towards a certain area.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And then when it comes to like your burden to help young men with lust and things like that, like where does that come from? Because I know like you specifically have a desire to really help young people. Not all young men have that. Like you're 23, but it
Mhm.
really seems like it's very important to you to be able to help young men in the area. So kind of like why is that?
That's a good question. I would say I kind of live by the motto that I'm a lover and not a fighter. And so I've always believed in the one. I believe that having someone in your life is really important. And I realized, going through high school, that something just wasn't clicking. I looked at porn for the first time when I was maybe eighth grade or ninth grade, like early high school. Didn't understand what was going on. And over time, I really started to see this culture build up with
Hmm.
instant dopamine hits going on social media and kind of getting exactly what you want out of pornography and realized that was really killing relationships. It wasn't until I got into my first relationship that I realized how big of a damage it was actually making to my life, but also other people's lives as well. You would think it's this thing that you could just stop when really you try to, you're in a relationship, realize how much it's affecting, especially when it comes to intimacy. I mean, I lost my virginity when I was 16 years old, and I recommend for most Christians, or actually all Christians, to wait until marriage, but I did not.
Yeah.
But I was at that stage with my partner where we were being sexual, and something it just was holding it back. I won't go too personal
Yeah.
about that, but I know for other men, not in my case, they'll suffer from erectile dysfunction and things like that. It just kind of takes away from the real intimacy, especially when you are engaging in sexual contact with your wife, ideally. And if you're so used to that instant dopamine and that fix you get from that instant clarity, then it starts becoming more about you rather than the shared love and experience you can have with your future wife or current wife.
Gotcha. So you started to see it like negatively impacting, you as a person, your relationships,
Hmm.
just really everything started to kind of seep and negatively impact just your life in general.
Yeah, and I couldn't stop, and that's when I realized maybe I do have an issue, and then I didn't understand why. I would pray so much, for this desire to be taken away, and it just wasn't working. And so that's when I got into the science behind it. Um, my name, for those who don't know, is the Science Christian Guy on social media. I believe in the bridge between science and religion, specifically Jesus. And I figured it'd also be a good way to kind of build those things together because on one side of the spectrum, they say, "Oh, I only believe in the science, like, because that's like,
Hmm.
proven, like, measurable data rather than just faith." And I figured,
Hmm.
I think that there's a good way to bridge that. Anyways, that's kind of off the porn topic, but
Hmm.
I figured if I could understand scientifically why I was doing the way I was doing, then I could figure out from there how I can apply that with prayer as well. And I found that to be the most effective strategy when overcoming porn addiction and things like that. And I could get into like the specifics of that, but I'll stop that there.
Okay. Gotcha. That makes sense. So obviously you were looking into a lot of self-help books, eventually decided, Jesus is the best
Hmm.
solution to your problems. The Bible is the best self-help book, right? And then you looked into a lot of science, trying to just understand why you were struggling in the ways that you were, things like that. And then when it kind of comes to your perspective, you can kind of go into a little bit of your perspective now based on the things that you've learned. What's kind of the helpful tip that you would give someone that's kind of struggling with lust right now when it comes to the combination of, using science and obviously God's word. And like specifically, you can talk about like I guess for this question, think about like a Christian guy, someone that is saved, they do know the Lord, but they're still struggling with lust. What have you what have you found to be kind of some helpful tips?
Honestly, there's a lot of different things you could apply there, but ultimately, if someone is trying to overcome it for the first time, I would say get off the battlefield because you're never going to win one on one. That's why we need Jesus because he's going to fight that for you. So I would say ultimately take a step back first, kind of really analyze your life and your motivations for why you do the things you do. Because oftentimes, men aren't lusting just because, oh, this girl is attractive or whatever. Typically, it's something that's deeply rooted inside themselves that's
Mhm.
not being fulfilled that they just don't understand yet. And ultimately, Jesus is the medicine for that. But if you can really start to understand like what that issue is for your own life, then it becomes so much easier to kind of make yourself an action plan to overcome that.
Gotcha. So, like you've noticed, a lot of young men that struggle with lust, porn, things like that, they have something missing. Like there's just something a little bit deeper. They have a void that needs to be filled, and that's
Yeah,
like why they're doing
absolutely.
it. Okay.
As a matter of fact, 68% of Christian men admit to watching porn regularly, and that includes pastors, leaders, and everyday guys who feel like they're living a double life. And 76% of young adults, Christian or not, actively seek it out. I think we could see that's not passive addiction, that's actually intentional.
Right. Yeah,
And
definitely.
the average age of first exposure to porn is 11 years old, actually. And by the time most guys reach that college age, their brain is already rewired for that instant dopamine hit.
That's that's crazy. 11 years old. I didn't realize it was that young.
Yeah.
And is like, are these like pretty recent stats you would guess?
Yeah, I would say,
Man.
according from my studies and understanding.
Yeah. Especially at a young age. Like I know it you're not even developed, like your brain isn't hardly developed at all. So I think that it just has such a worse impact, if you're exposed to things like that at an earlier age. I
Yeah.
guess uh, you can kind of go into more detail on like some of the impact of porn, lust, things like that, from just like your own personal experience studying this a little bit, trying to help people out. What are some more of like the long-term impacts that you've seen? I know you did mention it was like messing up your relationships and things like that, but I mean, you could go a little bit deeper into that, kind of paint that picture for people out there that might be wondering like, is this even a big deal, you know?
All right, I would say the number one thing porn kind of creates is it intensifies, actually, I think a better word would be distorts what intimacy should be. And what you often see in these videos are actors, actresses. That's really what it is. I mean, it's
Hmm.
bad acting, but
Hmm.
it's not reality. It's not rooted in reality. And if you've ever like watched porn or actually had sex, you see that it's a huge night and day difference. And over time, as you watch more of that porn, it kind of cements in your brain that, okay, this is the idea of like what I should be having in the bedroom. And when I lost my virginity, I was in that mindset. Okay, this is like what sex should be like, and I realized, okay, it's not actually like this.
Hmm.
It actually kind of sucked. It made sex so much worse. I didn't even like want to have sex again, which is kind of a good and bad thing. But
That's crazy.
when I
Yeah.
got into a relationship, when I was having sex more regularly, realized, okay, this is totally different. I gotta
Mhm.
fix something. It's either the relationship's the problem, which it wasn't, or
Mhm.
the porn is the problem. And obviously, the porn was the problem. And as I cut that out, it made intimacy much more satisfying. And I think this is especially important for married men,
Yeah.
like Christian men who are married and watch porn addiction, or just watch porn in general, I would say, and have
Mhm.
porn addiction. So I would say, in my own experience, like let me just say, I think for a lot of men, like I've already mentioned, that they suffer from erectile dysfunction, feel spiritually disconnected, they get
Yeah.
emotionally numb, anxious in their real relationships. I would say it definitely created a lot of anxiety for me because when you're doing something over time so much and you're thinking this isn't like hitting the same way,
Hmm.
you I'm trying to think of a good example, but it all has to do with dopamine and then pretty
Mhm.
much making what should be good in life become more
Yeah,
numb and dull. And you can
definitely.
even like outside of porn, like just anything in your life, too much of something is going to rot your brain so much, and it makes
Mhm.
everyday activities less enjoyable.
Yeah.
And this is slightly off topic, but it kind of goes with the topic. But
Yeah.
I go camping every year with my buddies, right? And we camp out in the woods, we cook, and it's like an escape from everything.
Hmm.
And then you come back and you sleep your own bed for the first time. It's an amazing feeling, but you don't get that feeling because you're sleeping in your bed every day. You kind of take things for granted. And I would say that's what happened in my relationship. I thought, this wasn't a big deal. Like, have sex, whatever, things like
Hmm.
that. And then once it's gone or it's kind of in a place where it's, you want to put it, or I guess put it in a place where this is something that you should truly like be grateful for and enjoy. And I think all sexual experiences should be like that. And that's why it's so important to wait until marriage for that because it makes sex this like this sacred thing.
Hmm.
And I think we live in a society today where sex is kind of thrown out like an everyday thing. Like, I had a date, I had sex, I never talked to her again. Like that's not the
Yeah.
way God designed us for. I believe he designed sex to be really sacred, something you enjoy with your lifelong partner. And as a matter of fact, if you're having sex before you're married and you break up, that makes the heartbreak and the hurt so much worse. And you'll sit there cursing God
Definitely.
and realize this is actually your own choice. You
Mhm.
create that bond with someone. It's supposed to be a bond. It's not supposed to be something you just do with anybody. It should be with
Yeah.
someone you love, and that's I think something that really clicked for me and something that a lot of young men need to understand.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think a lot of it has to do too with being able to look at like what the Bible says. I mean, obviously, in your situation, you were kind of away from God, didn't have a relationship with Him, and you fell into all this, made a
Hmm.
lot of bad decisions, right? But I think that ultimately doing it God's way is best. And I think, most Christians like have an idea of what that is, but I think that it's a correct boundary. It's going to be a lot safer that way. You're not going to make a lot of these bad decisions. You're not going to be making connections with people and have, super difficult breakups because you were sexual before marriage. And I think that God designed that to kind of keep us having clarity in a relationship before marriage. I think that if you get involved sexually with your partner before marriage, it starts to get more cloudy, and
Hmm.
like red flags don't look red if you're wearing rose tinted glasses. So it's like I think a lot of young men and women too, they experience that where they have a hard time breaking up with someone that's clearly not God's will for them because they were physical, things went sexual quick. I think that another thing too is people don't really get to know someone well, and then they become sexual pretty quick often in today's society. And then you don't even really know this person that well, but yet you're connected to them. But it's not companionship.
Right.
It's not a companionate love that you have towards this person. It's passionate love, which is not the same. And then over time, passionate love is going to decrease. Like if you look at marriage, for example, if you're married to someone for a lifetime, which is ideal, that's God's way, passionate love is going to decrease, but companionate love is going to increase. But what if your relationship is built on passionate love and you don't really have much companionate love? You're not really even like friends hardly. It's more sexually driven. I think that is a reason, one of many reasons why there's a lot of divorce, is because I think people are sexual and physical way too early. They don't even really get to know their partner before they, get really serious and things like that. And so it's like just thinking through as a young man, especially like what is this relationship based on? Like what's the foundation for our relationship? Obviously, it should be God and the Word of God, God's plan for us, and then also, companionate love, a deep, meaningful connection, friendship, all of these things. And then later on, when you get married, and you know that the person's the one, then you get to enjoy more of the sexual side of things, the passionate love, things like that. But it's not like the foundation of your relationship.
Right.
I think it's so important because what happens if she's not doing well or you're not doing well or you're in a bad mood or something bad happens. If your relationship's built on passionate love, it's gonna fall apart. You're gonna have a lot more problems that way, as opposed to really building a relationship on something that's more meaningful and companionate love, if that makes sense. So that those are some of my thoughts on it. And I think God's way is best. It keeps
Always.
us more, it gives us more clarity when we're um, conducting ourselves with people, getting to know other girls, I would say, and in a relationship helps us to have more clarity, and then it is going to keep us safe. We're not going to be as connected to people if we were to break up. Like we're able to actually make more rational decisions if especially us as young men, if we're not having sex before marriage and being physical before marriage. So those are a couple of thoughts on that I just wanted to add on to. But yeah, that's
Hmm.
that's good.
Hey,
Yeah.
so, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Andrew.
No, I was just gonna say, and not being exposed to that, and then finally experiencing that for the first time, and the way God designed it to be, you
Mhm.
realize how great this thing actually is, and like
Yeah,
what it's meant for.
yeah,
That's what I was just gonna add on. Go ahead,
definitely.
Steve.
Absolutely. So I have two questions. So the one is, obviously what we're talking about. I agree with everything you guys have said. It's really, really good, and I'm sure it's helpful to those who are listening. So for those maybe who struggle with it, or for those who don't, obviously we are as human beings, we do have a sexual side to us, right? That's something that God has given us for a real purpose, as we've been talking about. So kind of the way me and Dave have talked about it in different times, different discussions and stuff, is being able to channel that. You had mentioned that, obviously that is a desire, and it's something that's there, that's programmed within us. So how do we take what God has given us, and no matter if we're deep into it or not, how do we channel that in the way that God wants us to live and to proceed? Obviously, not being outside of marriage, outside of God's purpose. So how do we channel that? How do we kind of conduct ourselves? What are some thoughts on that?
It's a good question. I would say, well, one thing I tell the guys in my program or my followers, like I said, is to stop fighting the porn and start rebuilding your identity. Because you don't break addiction with willpower alone. You break it by renewing your mind first and foremost.
Hmm.
Also by reshaping your desires and creating new patterns in your life. And so, I actually have like a 3 to 5 step um, thing I do in my program, and I could go over that if you guys are
Sure.
interested in that.
You go
Yeah,
for it.
yeah, maybe just briefly just mention what you got there.
Okay, so step one is we expose the chains. We start by helping you uncover the hidden patterns, triggers, and spiritual strongholds that keep you stuck in porn and shame, like I talked about, figure out the why.
Hmm.
And by the end of that phase, you'll have basically deep clarity on why you keep falling and why you keep failing. And
Hmm.
it's definitely a good starting point for real transformation. The second step, which I think answers your question a good bit better, Steve, is to renew the mind.
Sure.
So we'll guide you through daily mind renewal using scripture, neuroscience, like I talked about, and powerful journaling practices. Journaling is actually a really big thing when it comes to understanding like what's going
Sure.
on inside of here and here. And that will help you break through like shame cycles. Shame is definitely one of the biggest things keeping you stuck because how do I frame this? I had a name for this process, but I'll just briefly explain it. So pretty much, you watch porn because you're hurting from something in your life or whatever, and after you watch the porn, you feel shame because you did it, and to numb yourself from the pain of that shame, you go right back to porn, and
Sure.
it's just like an endless vicious cycle that has to be broken, and it's one of the first few things we do in the program. And step three is building the battle plan. So we would create a clear, personalized daily strategy, including routines, accountability structures, and actionable tools to be able to crush those urges and stay consistent, things like that. So I would say that's probably the 2 to 3 step system we start with, but it's very personalized.
Sure. Sure. No, that makes sense. Yeah, that's good. And then kind of my second question would be, obviously we live in a culture where this is rampant. You gave stats, and it's pretty insane too. Not even just amongst folks who run unbelievers, folks who don't believe in God, but for Christians, for folks who do. How do we, in a culture that is pushing this, how do we? I'm going to use the term desexualize our brains. How do we focus on what we need to focus on, and be able to block out the noise around us? What are some things that you can give as far as helping us process and desexualizing our brains?
Yeah, so that's kind of like the core of it all. The program's called Rewired, and what we're trying to do is rewire our brains to not crave what we're so used to and what like social media and stuff is pushing, but to actually desire what God wants us to desire. And I would say the best thing to kind of get through that is to stop feeding it. And
Sure.
that sounds really simple, but it's actually not because we feed it every day unintentionally through social media, through
Hmm.
little things like you watch a show and there's a couple kissing. Little things like that can push you just a little bit over the edge and push you closer and closer to kind of feeding into that. And it has a lot to do with the community around you as well. If you're hanging out with the wrong people or like pushing things,
Mm.
then the best thing that even Jesus himself spoke of is to flee from temptation. You don't want to be near that. Like, you're not going to be able to overcome it on your own. And temptation, it can be really sneaky in those sorts of things. I think for me personally, social media is like a big thing. I even have this app on my phone where every time I go on Instagram, it forces me to take a deep breath and it asks me a prompt like
Mm.
why are you on Instagram right now? And it forces you to kind of be mindful about it.
Mm.
Okay,
That's
of
good.
course, with my page and everything, I have to be on Instagram, social media. I think if you can stay off of social media, but it's kind of impossible in this day and age. So it's really kind of filtering out what's good and what's bad because there's a lot of good you can find in social media, but it's also risky with the amount of bad that's there as well. I mean,
Hmm.
I've had an Instagram since like 6th grade, and I constantly get like flooded with temptation, like constantly.
Mm.
And even though you're like, oh no, it's like just this picture, it, you will start to understand, okay, this is clicking in my brain. Like, oh, I like this. It seems very, simple. You didn't. watch porn or anything after that. You think, okay, it's just a picture, but then that kind of starts to grow inside you
Mhm.
and kind of keeps building to the point where you are just full on watching porn and exposing yourself to that again.
Mm, that makes sense.
Absolutely.
I had a thought too when you were talking about being around the right types of people. I think it's important, especially for young men, that we know what's bad for us, like you're talking about with social media, being online, different things like that. I think we need to be more honest with ourselves. Like, what is going through our minds when we're on social media? What are we looking for? Like, what you do with the prompt before you go onto Instagram is great, because then you're being intentional with what you're doing with your time, where your focus is, things like that. And if you're around women that are a temptation and not good for you, or you're just around friends in general that are causing you to be more lustful or watching things that you shouldn't, just being aware of that, being honest with yourself, and having accountability would be another thing. We can kind of get into that in a bit too, just being accountable and real about what's bad for you. And really, like the Bible talks about, if your I offend you, cut it out. Being able to know yourself and be able to limit some of these things and set up, safeguards and different things in your life that are going to make it much harder to be lustful and to sin and things like that. Another thought I had too, when it comes to often what I'll tell young people, like, when I'm working with youth or just out and about having conversations with people, sometimes lust will come up, pornography, things like that will come up. And another thing that I think has been helpful to me and others is talking about focus and channeling. Like, those would be the two words that I often will use to kind of help them simply. So I think a lot of lust has to do with what you're focusing on and channeling your desires. Because obviously, sex is a beautiful thing. God created it. There's tons and tons of verses about it. Sex is not wrong. Your desires aren't wrong. It's natural biology, right? But what happens, just like with a lot of other things, is God creates something great, and then humanity, it's our sin nature. We decide to ruin it, to twist it, distort it, mess it up, like we've talked about already. So I think it's very key to understand that having desires is good. Like, you should want to do certain things, but God has a parameter. He has a boundary, and we need to stay within that boundary. And obviously, God says in marriage, it's great. Save it till marriage. Only do it with your spouse, right? Only, only channel these desires to your spouse. So your spouse should be the object of your sexual energy, your sexual desires. She, in our instance, because we're all guys here, she should be the object of your sexuality, nothing else, no one else. And obviously, it's harder when you're single because, like, you don't have a girlfriend, don't have a wife, so it can be harder, right, for guys out there that are single. But still, being able to learn how to have some self-control, some discipline, and learning to be able to channel those desires and not be in bad habits, not having like really bad habits where your mind is all over the place. You're looking at this girl, looking at that girl, and then this comes to focus. So, like, you are not sinning if you see someone that's modest. If you're like at the beach or you're out and about and like there's someone in modest that walks in front of you and you see them, that's not the sin. The sin is when you focus on that and you choose, I'm going to stare at that person, or I'm going to objectify them, or whatever. And so I think that as young men, we got to be careful with what we're focusing on, where our mind is going. It's one thing to admit, like, hey, I'm a sexual being, I have desires, but I need to be careful with what I focus on and where I'm channeling all of my desires, if that makes sense. And ultimately, it is harder when you're younger and single, you're not married. I think that this is something that accountability can help a lot with, being able to talk to someone, have accountability, like how to practically implement these things in our lives as young single guys.
Yeah, and just to clarify a good bit on that, you talked a good bit about the desires. There are some definitely good desires in there that can be distorted and things like that. But I think there's also a few different a few differences essentially when it
Mhm.
comes to our desires. Because something
Yeah.
I've experienced is even if you're like in a marriage and you're like having sex with your partner, whatever it is, objectifying them is still going to be a thing. And it's very important to clarify the difference between love making and just, okay, let me just get my fix really quick. Because
Hmm.
objectifying your wife is not a good desire, I would say.
Yeah.
It might naturally come because, you're sexually driven to your partner, but it's very different saying, okay, this is how like my person's going to get me off versus, here's how we can enjoy this time together. Because I
Hmm.
think one thing when it comes to sex is that you're not just pleasing yourself, you're pleasing each other, and it's a two-person process. Like I won't go into like any kinks or anything, but like
Yeah.
threesomes are like rampant. Like no, it's between
Yeah.
two people who love each other and are in a marriage essentially.
Yeah,
And I
definitely.
think in a marriage, more guys can quickly fall into the trap of, hey, it's okay. I'm married to this person. Can you get me off like right now, wife?
Yeah.
And I'll help you later. Like
Selfish.
like
Yeah, it
it,
could
it
be just
becomes
very
more
self
self-gratifying.
self-driven. Yeah. No, that
Hmm.
makes sense. I think it's also important to really understand that. I think that's a good thing you bring up because there is a lot of selfishness that can be in relationships. Doesn't matter if it's marriage or not. Like there's a lot of selfishness involved and understanding like what's the whole point of sex in the first place. This is something that I kind of looked into because I was a little confused when I was younger because I'm like, why do I have these desires? This is kind of annoying, you
Yeah,
know?
right.
But I was like, okay, so there's procreation, there's bonding, and then I would say I just missed the last one. Procreation, bonding, and enjoyment. I think. Let's just say that. There's probably better words for it. But ultimately, if you're a selfish person, let's say you're even married, you have a wife, but you're selfish, like the whole point of marriage and that union that God created is to for us to be more like Christ, right? To improve ourselves and all that. It's really good to have someone that can call you out and encourage you and all that. But then it's also to have children as well. And it's not good to be a selfish parent, to have kids and not care about your kids and be selfish. So it's important to, as a young man, to not be selfish and learn how to put other people first, because ultimately it is for procreation. But then there's also obviously enjoyment. It's something that, as married, couples, like we're supposed to enjoy that. And then also bonding. It's something that's supposed to draw us closer and really connect us in a great way and get much closer to our partner as a result of that. So I think it's this beautiful thing that God created. I just think so often, like a lot of other things, humanity, sin nature, the flesh, kind of takes over and can really
Yeah.
twist things if we're not careful and not, in tune with the Lord and His will and living that out. So those are a couple more of my thoughts on that too.
Yeah,
That's good.
and it's important for Christian men specifically who are exposed to this to really get ahead of it before,
Yeah.
entering a marriage or anything like that. Because if you are a Christian, you are with someone to be married, and if you don't address these issues right away, it's going to bleed into your marriage, whether you like it or not. And I think the best example is a Christian who has not been exposed to it, getting into a marriage, and then, like we've already said, being exposed to that for the first time, and then you kind of
Mhm.
already see, okay, this is the purpose of sex, and it's a lot harder to distort that. But we're in 2025 as of this recording, and it's very hard to not be exposed to it, especially when
Correct.
modern day media and culture is pushing this so heavily, so that I think being mindful is going to be very important and kind of getting yourself in check. And meditation is like something I teach in my program as well, specifically Christian meditation. I know it's more of like a Buddhist practice, but um, Christians, there's an aspect of it you can take that's
Definitely.
extremely helpful when it comes to capturing like the good desires and the bad desires. I even have a one exercise specifically I talked about on my page is where I forget the verse that Jesus said, but pretty much you catch fish, you throw away the bad fish, and you keep the good ones. I have an exercise when it comes to your thoughts, like when your thoughts
Hmm.
come to your head. Okay, is this a good fish, bad fish, neutral fish? And you're
Hmm.
not just like throwing away the bad ones. You're acknowledging, okay, I'm having this. This is normal, and I'm just gonna like let it be and like kind of let it pass, and then I'll
Yeah.
act on the good fish, the good thoughts, and what's ultimately what God's will is for my life. Because aside from all the porn talk, it this all has to do like with purpose in your life as well, with good decisions and bad decisions, and ultimately what God's will is. So, like I said, outside of sex, when it comes to any decisions in our lives, when we come to these fish, for example,
Hmm.
if we keep letting ourselves be consumed by the bad fish, we're going to stray off the path that God has for us. So that's why a big part of my program is not just about, overcoming porn addiction or anything, but really trying to step into the calling that God has for your life. So I
Yeah.
actually wouldn't even consider myself like a porn coach specifically. That's just like I think one of the biggest struggles with Christian men. It's more of a like a
Yeah.
personal development type of coaching I do, but that just ultimately leads back to Jesus. I would say I'm the type of person who's, I'm not saying I have the answer because so many coaches or gurus or whatever say, I have the answer, follow me. I'm saying, no, no, you're going this way. Go back over here because Jesus is over there. And
Just pointing people to Christ. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I find that to be the most fulfilling thing that anybody could do. And I just felt personally called to do that. And I
Yeah.
feel like getting yourself involved with a community of other guys or even women who want to do that, just basically keep pushing you back to Christ, no matter what your purpose is for your life that God's given you. If I can help someone get back on their purpose, whatever that is, then that makes me fulfilled.
Yeah, definitely. I had a thought too when it comes to purity. I think there's a lot of reasons why purity is good and we should strive for a pure life. One would be, I think that being pure keeps your sword sharp, so to speak. Metaphorically speaking, I think that in life you want to be effective for Christ. You want to live a life that matters. You want to add value and help people. You want to be a good friend, a good son, a good husband, a good father, etc. And one of the ways to do that is to be pure. It's going to keep you more effective for Christ. It's going to keep your sword sharp, so to speak. Same could be said about standards in your walk with God and like some of these other things too. To me, just practically, if someone's out there wondering like, why be pure? Like, what's the point? There's a lot of things. That would be one thing that just came to my mind. Hey, if you're a young man questioning why you should be pure, give that some thought. Another thing too that's helped me just with my thoughts in general. This doesn't necessarily just pertain to purity and lust, but just in general, my thoughts. We had a conversation with Mark Monty. It's another podcast you can look up. It was the second one with him, and he talked about how our thoughts produce emotions and our emotions drive our behavior. So it's very important for us to be able to analyze our thoughts and wonder and kind of I would say question them in a sense, being able to, like you said, is this a good thought? Is this a bad thought? Where is this coming from? How did this thought come to my mind? Was I in the wrong place or doing the wrong thing when I was tempted in this way? Just being able to really get a hold of your mind, being able to control your mind and your thoughts. Because ultimately, I think people that have the wrong actions, let's say someone that is very lustful, they're looking at pornography, things like that, they have other addictions, it's going to be because upstream somewhere they had the wrong thoughts and their thinking is eventually driving this less than ideal behavior that's not Christ-like, if that makes sense. So, just another emphasis again, like we've talked about so many times, the power of being able to control our thoughts, control our minds, be able to make sure our thoughts are being Christ-like. So, don't uh, don't count out that. Definitely want to work on that first and foremost. I would say the most practical thing is just being able to get a hold of your thoughts and make sure that you're thinking right things, focusing on the right things.
Yeah, absolutely. And a message I could say for even non-Christians who may or may not be watching this is
Yeah.
that I think I kind of came to this thought process like when I was early on in becoming a Christian. Like, because most people think that, oh, Christianity has all these rules, it's all about like holding yourself back from the enjoyment of life, when really it's not like for God's benefit that we're following his rules, not breaking his rules. It's for our benefit
Good.
because ultimately people are afraid they're not going to find any fulfillment when they're doing all these rules. But when that's just not the case. And I didn't really realize that before. I was like, oh, I got to not do this, not do that. When really those things we're not supposed to be doing can lead to such an
Yep.
unfulfilling life. And it's
Definitely.
only really when I started, actually trying to follow God and like restrict myself from the world, so to speak, that I realized, okay, this is actually super fulfilling, and I'm like more strict than ever. It's like a parent telling you to, don't do this, don't do that, like don't steal, whatever it is, like your parents telling you. You think, but
Yeah.
I really want that toy in the store. Like I can't just like grab it. Like no, you can't just grab it.
Yeah.
Like there's because there's consequences to our actions, right? And I guess that's my thought process there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And I just want to say really quick, this is why honesty is so important. Being willing to be honest with ourselves and allowing God's really his light shining in our life and exposing error for what it is. Um, what you said there is really good. Basically, not living according to truth is very detrimental. And we think the opposite. We think, well, if I can gratify myself and enjoy myself, well, then what's the hurt, right? But the whole point is that we go outside of God's parameters, what He's designed, and we find out, hey, that's actually more harmful. And Proverbs talks about, buying the truth, buying into the truth, know what is right, be honest with yourself. Like, don't just assume, don't just push it off. And this is the thing, when you're willing to be honest with yourself, you can either go down two paths. You can either be shameful and look at yourself and think, man, I'm a terrible person. Like, why does God love me? Nobody loves me. And you can kind of spiral down because you realize, okay, wow, I really am a terrible person. I sin. I have all these desires and stuff. But that's not who God is. The Bible talks about God being a healer and a helper. He's our savior. He wants to come alongside of us and enable us to do what we need to do. And so when we're honest with ourselves, yeah, it may look ugly, but the whole point is that that's the whole point and why Jesus is here. Why Jesus wants to be our helper and our healer, and He wants to come into our life and to make us a new creature after Him. And so the pursuit of holiness or purity or whatever it is, it does start with being honest. And I've heard a preacher essentially state it as, honesty is 50% of the battle. When we're willing to just look at ourselves for who we are, I acknowledge my sin, as the psalmist, as David said, I acknowledge my sin, I see it, and it's ugly. But the hope is that there's Jesus. And it's not just like living according to his real rules, it's experiencing him, it's experiencing his healing, it's experiencing the hope that he brings. And
Mhm.
obviously you look at the end result, you can live victorious, you can live, overcoming these desires and these temptations. And again, I'm speaking broadly here, but that's the whole point. And so yes, it starts with honesty, it starts with being humble, but that opens up your relationship with God. It opens up this channel of grace and blessing. And like you were saying, we have this picture of God that's just not accurate. And I think that's what God wants us to experience. But it starts with us being honest about where we fall, honest who we are, and that we need Him. So that's really good.
Yeah, some people never want to face themselves either. It's sad. Um, for example, for those who don't know, I kind of was raised by the world. I was very exposed to the world growing up. So I know what's out there. And people like to think of Christians of, oh, like they're so innocent, they don't know what's going on. But I think it's more so, hey, we're Christians and we're like this because we know what's going on. Like we're not hiding. Like I think
Yeah,
it's much more brave to be a Christian than to someone who's just, living life on their own.
sure, sure.
Like I could even use this like past weekend, for example. I went out to the bars with my friends. I don't drink, just an FYI, but I'm just seeing so many people like getting drunk on the dance floor, and you kind of just see like in their eyes, like in their soul, like there's something that's just not there. Something's
Yeah.
missing. Like they're numbing.
Yeah,
The and you feel really sad because these people are in pain,
Hmm.
and I think that's why the gospel is like so important and why I think so many people or everybody should turn their life to Christ.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. One of my desires is that people will just give Jesus a chance. I was talking to Jeremy, a guy that's coming to church yesterday. We were on outreach and I was just encouraging him to offer that opportunity to people. Hey, just give Jesus a chance. Because there's a lot of young people struggling with a lot of different things. And I wish young people just, hey, give them a legit chance, give it your all, and I think you'll find that it's truth. And another thing I think people struggle with is like when it comes to God's plan being best. I think sometimes they look at it like there's no logical reason behind it. It's just like, oh, God's plan's best, like whatever. But like Andrew, your title, Science Christian Guy, is great because it's showing some of the logic, the science, some of these other proven things, the evidence behind these biblical commands. One thing that pops to my mind is, you've heard the verse Matthew 5:28, but I say unto you, this is Jesus speaking, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. And it's interesting if you look at psychology, part of your brain when you are watching porn, let's say, doesn't know the difference between your imagination, what you're thinking, and real life. So part of your brain actually thinks, hey, I'm having sex with this person. You can't tear apart the two. Like it just part of your brain is thinking that way. So literally, not just, oh, that's some cool advice, Jesus. It's like, no, like Jesus is literally saying that's technically what is happening in your mind. You're committing adultery with someone in your mind, in your heart, very interesting. That's something that I try to bring up on occasion because I think some people don't see the big deal with it. That would be something I would say. And then what's going to happen naturally is you're going to drive a wedge between you and your spouse or you and your partner because you're thinking of other women, you're thinking of other people in a way that you should only be thinking of your spouse in that way, if that makes sense. So if you want the best relationship, you want to have the best connection with a person, you want to have a very meaningful and fulfilling relationship in life, do what Jesus said and don't lust after a woman and commit adultery in your heart, in your mind. Just a thought there. I know it's a little off topic, but I had to bring
No,
that.
not at all. That's frames it perfectly because you are pretty much cheating on your partner when you're watching that stuff. But
Mhm.
it's very controversial with people because it's technically not cheating, but it is. It really is. And one thing, as the science Christian guy, you cannot get love, meaning, and purpose from science. You just can't.
Yeah.
Science is the study of the process of God's creation. Very cool, very fascinating. That's why I'm into it, not just because I'm getting my answers from that, but okay, this cool. This is how God did this. I find that fascinating, but you'll never
Yeah.
get meaning for your life or purpose inside a testing tube or a lab or anything. You just can't. And most people cannot accept the reality of moral relativism, for example, that, if there is no God, then there essentially we're just fooling ourselves in what purpose and meaning is. And maybe that's the sad truth some people do accept deep down. That's why they numb themselves with things like alcohol and pornography and partying, things like that because they don't know what the meaning is and they can't accept that there is no meaning when Jesus is literally chasing you down, trying to give you a meaning for your life. So I think you framed it pretty perfectly there.
Good. Thanks. Yeah, it's definitely been helpful to me in understanding, okay, what thoughts are appropriate and what thoughts aren't, what actions and behaviors are appropriate, what aren't. I think that so often these are not things that are really talked about much in the home, like with our families or with our friends or even at church. Like I think obviously sexual things, lust, temptation, all that, it's not talked about a whole lot, at least in like great detail. So that's something that helped me to really make sure that I'm careful with what I'm thinking about and when it comes to lust, because I don't want to commit adultery in my heart, in my mind. So it's something that it's kind of shocking. It's like, wow, like that's quite the statement, Jesus. But it's technically true. Like it's true in the sense of like it's a good principle, it's good advice, but it's also like technically true if you really look at it. So it's sobering to realize. But yeah, I wanted to ask you too, when it comes to encouragement for young men specifically that are struggling, feeling a little bit hopeless, feel a little bit stuck, like what would you say is your best advice to guys like that?
I would go back to the identity thing and really
Okay,
try to hone in like, okay, who are you? Do you believe Jesus is Lord? Let's get that first and foremost. Like,
definitely.
if you are saved, you are literally a child of God, and no matter what your actions are, it's never gonna like, tear you apart from that entirely, especially if you care. I think many Christians worry about being a hypocrite because, I do believe, but I keep doing, the wrong thing. And, what if Jesus doesn't even accept me into heaven, things like that, because I screwed up so many times. Like,
Hmm.
there's nothing we could do to even earn heaven in the first place. So I think trying to get them to understand, hey, I know you just sinned or whatever you did, but Jesus still loves you and wants you to come to him. I think of the
Yeah,
prodigal son where, the father was so happy his son came back after, doing all these things and running away. I want to hone in. That's what God is doing for us. He wants us
yeah,
to come home. And when we sin and we turn back to him immediately, he's happy we're doing that. And there's no need to shame yourself anymore. And anything else that's like telling you, oh, you're not good enough, things like that, that's from the enemy. Like that's not from God. And you should know that. And you should kind of catch that and capture your thoughts. Like another journaling exercise I do is like when someone does relapse, for example, think about, okay, where were you? What were the thoughts going on? And what are you telling yourself afterwards? Because what you tell yourself afterwards is often actually the beginning of that cycle, even though it's at the end. And it's what
yeah,
keeps that repeating. So if you kind of stop it in the tracks there, I think a few breakthroughs I've had it was if I were to relapse or something or watch it again, I would tell myself, hey, I just did that, but and I'm praying, I'm repenting, but I'm still like a child of God,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't say like
Yeah,
I felt better or anything like that. Like, of course, you're
sure.
that shamefulness is definitely the hardest thing to get over, but
So, oh, are you done? Sorry.
no, yeah, just about. I think so.
So the way I've heard it put to by a preacher is he eventually, or essentially, excuse me, he essentially says that unbelief is not the answer for unbelief. In other words, when I sin, it's because I'm choosing to believe something that is not true about God, myself, truth, etc. So we're buying into an untruth, right? And so discouragement or despair, that's unbelief as well. And so the cure for sin can't be, well, I'm discouraged and this is who I am and yada yada yada. Off of that too as well, the Bible calls the devil the accuser of the brethren. And so one of the devil's tactics is to tell us, hey, you're not worth it. Hey, you'll never amount to anything. Hey, essentially, spewing lies in our face. And so we do have a choice there to choose truth or not. And so I talked about this a little bit earlier too. You have shame and you have guilt. And so the devil's going to drive shame into your heart. I'm hopeless. I'm always going to be this way. It's never going to get better, right? Whereas God, he sees that, but he already died for your sin. And what he's offering you is not just forgiveness, but he offers you the grace, the healing and all of that. And so guilt drives you to hope, which is Jesus. That's the answer. That's the solution. That's that's where he's pushing us, right? Whereas the devil's going to be offering us shame, like, yeah, you're a terrible person. Obviously he can only do so much to Christians, to believers. That's one thing that he does in our sin. And so I think it is important, as you're saying this is important to recognize the difference between shame and guilt. And guilt is of God. That's the right view of our sin. The Holy Spirit convicts us, hey, you sinned, you broke my law, but guess what, there's hope. And so I just love that picture and what you're saying, and it's powerful. But our answer is always Jesus, no matter how far we're gone, no matter where we're at. It's always Jesus.
Yeah, very well said for sure.
Yeah,
And go ahead.
I was just gonna say to kind of answer my own question, encouragement for people that feel hopeless, stuck, things like that. I think that you have to start where you can start. You have to start small. I mean, you want to aim as high as you can, and ideally, none of us will have a lustful thought the rest of our life, right? But that's not realistic. Someday, we'll be in heaven, we'll be perfect, won't have to deal with it. But here on earth, we do. It is a struggle for all men if we're at least honest with ourselves. But I think that you have to look at where you're at and be able to try to take wins where you can and start small. Like for example, if I paint a scenario, maybe a young man is on social media a lot, he's online a lot, he's constantly being tempted by the things he's seeing, struggling a lot with lust. I would say, well, something you could do is limit the time you're on social media. You can do that. You probably should, even if you're not even doing anything wrong, because it can often be a waste of time. Like that's something very simple that I think a young man could do to at least take a step in the right direction. And then from there, maybe like, okay, what are you doing on social media when you're on social media? Why are you going on social media? And then like what you talked about is great when it comes to identity, looking into that, looking into identity, relationship with God. Like, what do I believe? Do I think that I believe in God, but it's really like, yeah, like he saved me, but I don't believe that he can actually help me with my problem. That's another thing maybe you have to think through. Do you actually believe that God can give you help and enablement, and the Holy Spirit can give you guidance with your struggles? That's something that you actually believe to your core. And then another thing you could do is come to church when the doors are open. Get in your Bible every day. Pray every single day. Pray about your temptations, the issues you're struggling with. Like these are things that I feel like even if someone just picked one of those things, it's not that hard. Anyone could do that. I mean, ideally you do all of it and you start small and you hit every single category. You try to handle the whole thing at once and just start small in these different areas. But I think that'd be my advice is just start small, commit to something. You got to commit to something. Hey, I'm gonna for the next month do X, Y, Z, and then just do it. But don't commit to something that you don't think you can actually do. And then you could get accountability. That's another way you could start small. Just talk to your dad, a sibling, a brother, friend, somebody that you trust, your pastor, somebody. Just talk to somebody about it and start building that relationship with them, being accountable, just being open with them. And I think another thing that might bring someone comfort is, although sin is never okay, I have to preface this by saying sin is never okay. It's never okay to sin. But at least like you're trying. If you're trying to do the right thing, if you're actually trying to not have a lustful life, and you're trying not to look at things you shouldn't, that's the start. So at least you can give yourself credit that you actually care. You actually care about what the Bible says. You actually love the Lord. You actually care about your own self, and you actually are trying, even though you might not be perfect. Again, sin is never okay, but maybe just something to kind of comfort people. I know that that's been helpful to me at times when I feel like I'm falling short in different areas. So those would be a couple other things that I would add on to that might be able to help young people to start taking steps in the right direction to overcome lust.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's what God sees ultimately. He sees your effort. He sees you're trying despite, what failures may come. And this is kind of an open question, but you guys can feel free to answer it.
Hmm.
What are you doing with your daily life? I mean, we talked a lot about social media and things like that, but outside of like porn or whatever sin it leads you to, you have to
Yeah.
think about the intention of like what you're doing with your day. Why do we go on social media in the first place? Like, what are we trying to fulfill? And
Yeah.
regardless of whether it leads to porn or anything else, you got to think about, okay, what am I exposing myself to at this moment? Like, that's it's probably been like the hardest for me, especially with social media. But I would say, recently, I would say even like the last couple of days, I kind of switched from scrolling on Instagram to like reading a book on my phone. I
Mhm.
think reading is like a really good habit. I think everybody should read. I won't go into any like the benefits of that, but basically the question is, how intentional are you about with what you're doing throughout your day?
Yeah. That's really good. I heard a recent phenomenal thought, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately with really just my life as a whole. And it kind of stems from connection. So I'll share a little story and kind of just go into this a little bit more. So there was a test done on addiction, I think back in like the 70s, 80s. They did a test on, I believe it was mice or rats, and they had one mouse in a cage with like this water that had like heroin or cocaine in it, and the rat or the mouse would always just eventually kill themselves. They were just addicted. They would just nonstop be consuming that, and eventually it would take their life. And then they did another study like, okay, what about mice that are in an environment that has like cheese and food and things to do and like a bigger space, other mice to play with, things like that. And then they also would add into this like pretty much perfect environment. Then they would add this cocaine or heroin water, and the mice didn't even touch it. It's like, okay, well, that's interesting. Why do they not touch it? It's because they're connected to other things that are more meaningful than this substance. If you want to talk about substances, you could even say maybe pornography in a way is a substance too, right? Just to kind of keep it simple. So I think so often we're looking at addiction as something that it's not. I think often with addiction, it's like we feel connected to it. We feel alive. You're addicted to something, you feel connected to it. That's why you do it. It makes you feel alive, even like pornography, dude. I mean, you probably know this. There's probably a lot of young men out there that they feel alive when they're watching porn
Yeah, they feel
because their
wanted.
life is meaningful. Their life is empty. They have no fulfillment. They don't know the Lord. And so that's the only thing that makes them feel alive. It's the only thing that they feel connected with, which is sad, by the way. How crazy is that? But I think so often we're on social media, we're in places we shouldn't be talking to people we shouldn't because we're trying to feel connection, which is it's fine. Like we should want to feel connection. But what's the best way to feel the ultimate connection, to have purpose, meaning, fulfillment? It starts with a relationship with God, having a connection with God, and then also a connection with other people and a connection with yourself. And most important, the connection with the part of you that is trying his best to improve himself. Like you want to make to have that connection. That's what I've been working on. There's more potential. I know I have more potential, so I want to try to bring that out in myself and pursue being more like Christ. So I think so often, even in my own life, recently I've been thinking, okay, if I'm on social media too long, it's because I'm trying to like find connection and maybe it makes me feel alive or I feel connected, even if it's not like wrong, but it's still just being able to notice that, like, am I just trying to feel a connection with something? And should I be really trying to make a connection with other people or my business? Maybe I need to just put more work into my business and really connect with adding value to others and making money or serving in the church or helping young people out with whatever, like with, the ministry me and Steve have at church, just really diving into those things more and trying to pursue the right ways of connecting, if that makes sense, and trying to feel alive by doing the right things, not trying to be alive, feeling alive, doing things that you shouldn't. It's just something that I've been thinking about. It's not the most eloquent formed thought as of right now, but it's something that I've really been thinking about a lot lately. Just connection to keep it simple. But yeah, just wanted to throw that out there too.
Can you say
So
something?
it just makes me think too, the Bible, at least in the King James, um, it talks about two individuals. I believe it's a couple, and I don't want to mess up the names, but it's in the epistles in the books that the Apostle Paul wrote. But he basically mentions at the end of the book that they were addicted to the gospel. And I haven't done a thorough word search on that and everything,
Yeah.
but the idea is that addiction in and of itself, which is basically what you're saying, is it's not just about the actions and, oh, like I do this a lot, so that I got to stop doing this. It is about rewiring. It is about transforming how you view life and how you view meaning and how you view connection, really. And I actually saw the same report, Dave, that you were mentioning,
Yeah.
and it puts it in a light of truth. I'll just say it that way. Whereas, I think a lot of times the voice on it on addiction is like, be free and don't ever be addicted. And that, I don't think that that's true. I think that God wants us to be bonded and connected to the right things because that's how he made us. And so again, you mentioned this earlier, Dave. We take what God has made and we turn it and we twist it, and so it's rethinking it, but it's also like replacing it. So if you're struggling with, it could be any kind of temptation, any kind of addiction. It doesn't have to be, pornography or whatever. It could be anything. There is a principle, and the Bible talks about replacing that and being able to say, okay, God, this is where I'm struggling. I want this. I'm honest with myself. This is where I fall, etc. But then, God, I want you to put set my heart on the right things to pursue, your kingdom, essentially, and to find connection, to find meaning, which you realize when you do that, like that's where the most fulfillment comes from, knowing God and seeing him use you. And so it is about that exchange there, and recognizing like it's okay to be in a certain sense, right? In a certain sense, it's okay to be addicted to the right things, in a certain sense, right?
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's true, and I think we have to view it properly, in the light of
Yeah,
truth. So
it's good. Anything you wanted to add, Andrew? I know you seem like you were going to say something.
I was, but I totally forgot.
Hey,
oh
that's
my
all right.
bad.
While you think about it, Steve, I was just thinking this while I was talking, while you were talking. There was this term that I think I came up with it a while ago, maybe a year and a half ago, when we were kind of just starting to make content. It was like Jesus cocaine. It was just the term.
Mhm.
And that was like the Apostle Paul says, being addicted to the ministry. Like to me, it just made sense. And like the young people really like it like made sense to them. They're like, oh, I get it now. Because someone was asking, like, is serving Jesus meaningful? Like, how do you get like purpose and meaningful, from serving God, whatever. Good question. And so to me, I explained it, and that's what helped me to explain it. It was like you pursue God, you take steps of faith and obedience. It might not make sense, and eventually, like the Bible says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good." You taste and see that the Lord is good, and you see, wow, God has a plan for my life. Wow, serving Jesus is meaningful. God has different things that He wants me to do, and when I do those things, wow, makes me feel super fulfilled. And so I feel like when it comes to being addicted to the right thing, I think so often it's you're connected, like if you think of addiction as being like connection, but like over the top, where like you can't but connect with that thing. You could look at Jesus cocaine as being connected to God and His mission for you. I thought that that's a pretty interesting thing. Obviously, you make connections in your mind as a result of like what you experience. Wow, I've experienced God. This is so cool. I make these connections. A light bulb goes on. Awesome. But then in addition to that, like now you're connected to that. You find purpose and meaning, and then like you're pursuing that. It's like Paul said, being addicted to the ministry. So that's just something that kind of came up, Steve, when you were mentioning that.
And
But
that's why I think that the pursuit
yeah,
of God and we ask the question, why God, and it's why it's so powerful because the world and what it has to offer, and even we can even talk about the religions,
yeah,
it doesn't offer that hope, and that hope is what keeps us grounded. I believe it's what motivates us, that love for God as we begin to develop that relationship and we see all the blessings that come from it. And that's one of the reasons why I made the choice, hey, I'm going to pursue God despite all these other options and distractions in my life. I believe that, not just head knowledge, but also experientially that God, I get the most return on my investment, if that makes any sense, right?
yeah.
And I want to ask you, Andrew, too. As you look at your life and where you're at right now, what are some thoughts maybe on why you've made the choice to pursue God, and you would share with those who are listening and the younger generation and folks, hey, this is what's in it for you to serve God, to pursue Him, and to develop that relationship with Him.
Yeah, funny enough, and my answer was actually almost going to be like a contradiction to your question. I was going to
Okay,
emphasize the fact that more recently of becoming more outcome independent with of your walk with God. Because if we get so focused on what's in it for us, then we kind of forget to carry the cross.
absolutely.
And it's pretty ironic how the ultimate answering to suffering is God who suffered.
Hmm.
And I've had definitely a year. I think many people have had some rough times every now and then. But I would say if I were to answer a what's in it for you, I would say is the ultimate purpose of eternal life in a broad sense of you're doing something that is ultimately meaningful and healthy for you despite you not seeing it right now. It's like when you go on a diet or start going to the gym for the first time, you're going to have some growing pains, you're going to be a little sore,
Mhm.
but that's ultimately what's going to be best for you, and to ultimately really build your trust with him essentially, and to
Yeah,
understand that what you want isn't always going to be what you want. God has
Hmm.
other plans for you, and to pretty much be okay with whatever's going to happen going forward, and to accept that
Absolutely.
the answer to
Absolutely.
suffering is suffering.
Yeah, and that's good that you brought that out too, because I think a lot of people think, oh, pursuing God, okay, I guess I'm gonna have this life full of blessing and no problems, and
Yeah,
whatever
no.
comes my way, I'm just going to be able to tackle it because I got God. And you're right. It's not like all of these, sparkly things that we get when we start to pursuing God,
It is at
but they're
first.
right. And it's actually, and we watched a video in the teen class about suffering and kind of the answer to suffering. And one of the points that was made is Christianity is the only thing that really gives an answer for it,
yeah,
a sufficient answer for it, and that is you have God, you have the creator of the universe, the one who loved you and died for you, and you have that hope. And so, despite all of that, life sucks, man. You're gonna have difficulty. But in the pursuit of God, what you find is you find all the meaning, you find the reason, you find the purpose, but you find a relationship with Him that you can't experience with anybody else. We've talked
Amen.
about, that void that we all have, right? And so it's not just, and we could all attest to this. We're believers and we're pursuing God. It's not rid of obstacles and trials, but it's in that pursuit of God when we face those trials that we realize, hey, there's meaning, there's purpose, there's a God that loves me despite anything that I go through. I had this hope in him. And obviously, he wants to come alongside and help you and deliver you and to heal you and to create, this is the whole process of sanctification, being conformed to the image of his son. And, but I like what you said there because that's very true. A lot of people think, oh, okay, I guess I'll just pursue God. And then something hits them and it's like, this isn't supposed to happen. And it's like, no, no,
yeah,
that's not how it works.
Yeah.
But that's good. I appreciate that.
And that's definitely been very tough for me because I've always been like a logistical person. Like, okay, this has to mean this, or else it's going to mean this.
Sure.
When really, it's not faith if you know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I don't know if it's like some sort of OCD or whatever, but I'm very hands-on. Like, things have to be ordered and structured that way. And if it's not going to be the way I think it is, then there's no point. And it's flawed ultimately. And I
Sure.
think, like I just mentioned, becoming outcome independent with it, with whatever's going on in your
Yeah.
life. I mean, that could be relationships, events in your life, deaths, whatever, and just accepting and understanding that I even say it that God ultimately has a plan for you anyways, and that
Yeah.
there is a purpose for what you're holding and carrying, and that the whole point is to build that relationship with him, like
Yeah.
you said, and to build that trust. Because I think every relationship requires trust. And we talked about this last Wednesday night about okay being angry with not having what you want, but ultimately
Mhm.
accepting it. Like when your parent tells you no, you're gonna stomp and you're gonna go to your room, slam the door. Well, ultimately, like deep down inside, okay, this is what's best, even though I don't see it right now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And faith really quick, and then I'll let Dave. If you mentioned faith and this whole aspect of believing God, faith is all about the object of faith, right? So if in the English language, you have your subject, your verb, and then you have your objects, indirect objects, prepositions, whatever, right? I'm not a grammar scholar by any means, so but faith is all about the object of faith, and so faith comes down to what you're putting your trust in specifically, and so you're not trusting in some mystical like, oh, everything's going to be good and I'm going to figure it out. And, your faith is actually in God and it's always in God. And so, despite whatever you go through, if your faith is in God, not in circumstances, not in yourself, not in authorities or friends or whatever, you're going to find yourself grounded because it's in God. That's the object, right? So, your faith is in God and that keeps you grounded. So, that's good.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
Like
good.
you say, it's immovable as well.
Yep.
Yeah. I was just gonna say it's an important question to ask, like, what's in it for young people to, I would say, pursue a relationship with God or whatever. It's it's something that's interesting to me because I think people, generally speaking, only do things that they want to do. People only commit to things that they want to commit to. And maybe it's a little complicated, like maybe at face value, you're like, I don't want to do this thing, but I do it. But there's probably part of you that knows that although you don't want to do it, it's best for you. So like there's something in it for you. That's why you're doing it. Like coming to church might be uncomfortable or annoying at times, but you know it's the right thing to do. There's something in it for you, so you do it anyway. And I think that it's just something that is important for us to be able to help the younger generation out with because there's so many other things to pursue. Obviously, people could pursue, exploring their sexual desires or technology. They could pursue all the substances. There's so many substances and different things that are accessible that I think young people are more and more now like experiencing at a younger age and pursuing and finding it to be empty and fulfilling. So it's definitely important for us to, know like why are we pursuing Jesus and things like that. So any other questions, Steve, that you had or anything else, Andrew, that you wanted to ask?
Not top of my head right now. I think we covered a good bit as far as
Yeah.
the topic of today, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say we have too. It's been a good conversation so far. Steve, what were you going to say?
No, I mean, I think this is all really good. I hope this helps people. I mean, we did go into
Yeah.
depth with a lot of it, and it's kind of an uncomfortable thing, but the most important thing is being honest with yourself. And so, take what you can from this conversation, and I hope it's a blessing to you.
Yeah, definitely. And Andrew, one last question for you. I know you've made a lot of videos, got a YouTube channel, Instagram account, probably other accounts that you're putting content on. But let me ask, like, if you could name maybe one or two things that you would like to be known for, like, what would you say you'd like to be known for? Let's say at the end of your life, let's say when it's all said and done, all the content's done, being posted, everything that you could do on this earth is done. What do you want to be known for at the end of the day?
I don't know if it'd be one thing in particular, but I think one thought I would want to have is that this guy cared about people's souls and he did
Mm.
what he could with what he was given and ultimately did his best regardless of, the outcome for certain people because, not everything's going to align so perfectly, especially if you're like a coach or a counselor or a pastor or leader, whatever you are.
Yeah,
But I think ultimately it's what we can see in ourselves, like the thoughts we have about ourselves and our identity, and what's really most important. And I would just hope people would try to see the heart behind my actions. I think for you guys as well. But even if the world were to hate me, I think I would like be okay with that too.
Hmm.
gotcha. That's good. Well, thanks, man. This has been the Pursuit of Truth podcast. Thanks for hopping on the podcast with us. It's been a good talk.
All right, thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
All right, Andrew, take care, bud.
thank you, man.